Dr. Ratnam, Mr. Quilty.
Thank you, Acting President. I will be brief. The Victorian native timber industry is well managed, sustainable and essential to maintaining our national parks. When this industry is gone, our parks will be increasingly degraded. Without timber workers and their equipment managing things, species will be pushed out. Monocultures will emerge. Fires will wipe out whole species of plants and animals. It will be a complete disaster. The bill today is to increase penalties for protesters going into logging areas. Frankly, I'm somewhat incredulous at this government, the same government that's destroying the Victorian timber industry and destroying the communities that depend upon the industry in the pursuit of some ideological position, wants us to believe that they are the defenders of the industry. We will not be fooled. You hate regional timber workers, their votes don't matter to you. And the lunatic, anti-timber, anti-job, anti-worker protesters who define their life around this holy war to save the trees, you can stop now. The war's already over. This government's rolled over. The industry is doomed. Jobs in regional communities will be lost. You've already won. Instead of a well-managed, sustainable local industry, you are supporting the destruction of rainforests overseas. Timber use won't drop, but environmental damage will go through the roof. So well done there. Go find something else useful to do with your life. Opposition to nuclear power, which is the only way to effectively decarbonise the economy in favour of environmentally destructive renewables, would seem to be on brand. Hydropower, like damming the Franklin, is the only other sustainable solution for baseload power. But of course you oppose that. I'll also just note that some of the loudest voices against this legislation, against this attack on protesters, were hot for crackdowns on protesters during the last 2 years. It's hypocrisy. On this bill, the Liberal Democrats do not have a single party position. As David has said, in the Liberal Democrats, every vote is a conscience vote. But because classical liberalism is a coherent, internally consistent philosophy, unlike most others represented in this place, we almost always arrive at the same answers to questions. Today I plan on supporting the bill, and we understand David's taking a different view. For the first time in this parliamentary term, we'll vote in different ways. I certainly understand his position, but he is, of course, wrong. I believe this bill is about property rights. The protests are not taking place in public national parks. They are happening on land leased to logging companies. Just like any private workplace, there is no right for protesters to come barging in. Timber workers who have a lawful right to go about their business are continually harassed and interrupted by protesters. People who chain themselves to machinery and who camp out in trees in logging coops are trying to force down tools and sabotage work. This bill increases penalties for people engaging in this disruption. Specifically, protesters have been bringing their PVC pipes and chaining themselves to machinery with their limbs hidden in the pipes to make it difficult to safely remove them. The protesters are employing tactics that rely on the restraint of the people they are attacking. In a just world, when you attach yourself to someone else's bulldozer and refuse to leave, the owner would have every right to remove you. If you intentionally make it unsafe to do this, then you should wear the consequences of that. But this bill takes a milder approach. The state is apparently eager to avoid protesters being crushed by logging machinery or having their arms sawn off by an angle grinder. Instead, it's just making the penalties for violating property rights a bit more severe. Now, I believe in protest. It's part of our fundamental right to free speech. I believe in the right to free assembly. Yell and shout, post on social media, hold up signs, publish a pamphlet, march in the street, and lobby your politicians. But don't damage other people's property, harass individuals, and sabotage their work. Just as we don't let protesters into office buildings in the city to chain themselves to the printers or across workers' desks, we should not allow them into the licensed timber coops where logging is underway. To be clear, I understand my colleague David's position. I'm not at all comfortable giving VicPol increased powers or increasing penalties for protesters. We've seen how this government uses the power of the state to crush legitimate protest, uses police brutality. It disturbs me to give any aid or comfort to this attitude. But at least the timber protesters are the government's fellow travellers. They're unlikely to unleash the full fury of their paramilitary units on them. The timber industry in Victoria is already being hammered by government-mandated closures and red tape. The least the government can do is properly enforce their lawful rights over their own property. At the end of the day, I will stand with the timber workers and regional Victorians involved in the industry. I support this bill.